You ready?
Wait a second.
Say when.
Go.
Because of the cultural differences in the background and training of Southern women, they tended to function locally and in small groups. At least 400 women from both the North and the South served on active duty as frontline soldiers, and those who did not take this active participation role educated children at home because of the absence of formal schooling. Now that's quite a record, isn't it? An almost unbelievable list of contributions. Well, I've babbled on again, haven't I? As I mentioned before, I'm not exactly a Springs chicken, and I find I do get quite tired. So my poor old brain is now whispering, stop, stop. And on that note, I'm going to say goodbye and go off to Oswego, my real home, my place of wonderful memories, my roots deep in the sod of good old upstate New York, where I began, and most certainly exactly right where I hope and pray that I will end. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
You're not afraid. You're very welcome to say you're not afraid, okay?
Good for you.
We'll try. Hard.
You know what I think?
Good afternoon. On behalf of the Military Museum and the Military Heritage Institute, the volunteers here at the museum, we welcome you. We hope you're going to have a wonderful experience this afternoon. It's really a great pleasure to begin the program today by introducing Joseph Sylvia, who is a bugler at the Saratoga National Cemetery, honor guard. He's an honor guard there, and he's going to be talking with us. He's part of the bookends approach to this program. He will be speaking with you and talking with you, and then you're going to pick up the red folder that you have and follow inside that folder the 7 locations here in the museum for mini presentations. Sir, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for inviting me. Obviously, as part of this, if being teachers, one of the things that we want to do, obviously, is find out what might be of interest, obviously, for the students that you have in your classrooms. And one of the things which probably you will hear about if you haven't already heard, a book written, which happened last year when we had come here once before, The Little Bugle, and Gustav Sherman, who was only 11 years old when he enlisted into the Army, and into the Union Army. And one of the things he did, obviously, that was so important, he was also a skilled drummer, but one of the things is how do you communicate with service people and people who are out in the fields. People who are out in the fields and fighting in terms of knowing when you have cannons going off, all kinds of rifles, things is how do you communicate with your men. So the one thing this little 11-year-old boy was assigned to do was to be specifically at the side of the general at all times so that he could give orders to the people who could no longer hear, the English language, and so that they would understand what was necessary to do during a time of battle. And obviously it's a lot different if you hear a piece of music that says attack versus retreat, or the fact mail call versus lunch. Every single thing that was done through this little bugler. The interesting thing about Gustav, and here when you go through the museum, you will actually see his uniform, you'll actually see his bugle, which he actually played, and I believe when you see it, you'll see there'll be a dent in his, which was actually shot out of his hands at one time. He was also the friend of Tad Lincoln, who was President Lincoln's son. He visited the White House, things of that sort. He was a very young man, and obviously served from 1861 to 1864, and served for 4 different major generals. And one of the things I wanted to point out to you before I actually played some of the calls that were actually heard, and obviously it's a lot easier to hear here because it's a small room, but you can imagine on the battlefield with guns and rifles and everything that's being done, how difficult it is to try to get that, messages across. And I'm sure, like always, there's always some people who didn't get it, but like sort of, I always thought of it in terms of an analogy, sort of like, not being familiar with exactly what you're supposed to do in church. It's sort of like someone stands, everyone starts standing, someone sits, someone kneels, and even if you don't know exactly what to do, you follow. And so they learn fairly quickly. And the thing that I thought was really interesting that kids may want to know, it's of course all kids, because they're kids themselves, 11 years old. I mean, isn't that incredible? 11 years old and you're joining the service, but there was also commitment to the country and what they felt they were fighting for. And one of the statistics, which I feel is very, very important to have you know, the Union soldiers enlistment records, there was a total of 10,233 soldiers that were below the age of 18. 773 were 15, 330 were 14, and 127 were 13 or younger, including 27 children who were in this war who were under the age of 10. And it's hard to believe. And so, when they talk about the Civil War and things that were really going on and the type of thing, it's really amazing when you think of these children, being at war. And most of them were volunteering. It isn't like they were dragged into it. And many of them, and probably one of the things which other kids may feel that's pretty interesting, some of the soldiers, these are children, I mean they call them soldiers because they're in the war, obviously they're wearing a uniform, but they realized because their parents had told them, or even what their teachers had told them, you're not supposed to lie. And one of the things these children did was they took 18 and wrote it out on a piece of paper, glued it into their shoes, okay? And they were standing on it and they said, I'm over 18. And that's how they stayed in the Army, and because they were over 18 and they weren't lying. So it's quite a message, you can imagine, and how fascinating children really are, as I'm sure you, as teachers, you all know. Some of the things, and obviously you can ask questions at other time, I sort of wanted to introduce you. This is the trumpet, obviously, and it's one of the things that I play, and I usually play it because it has a sweeter tone than the bugle, but I will play the bugle also since I have one with me. But obviously you can do many more things with a trumpet because it has valves, okay? And because it has valves, you can play different notes. Like for instance, on a bugle, and the reason for that, everything is done with the mouth, okay? So it's similar when you blow a note into a trumpet, but then you have valves to help you. So for instance, just the scale, which you already know. And that's just the scale, okay? And because of that, you have the notes, you can make different melodies. But when you're on a bugle, I got my bugle now, and this beautiful case that I have here was actually made by Marie, who's part of the military here when I played here last year. And she said, I'd like to make that for you. And I said, thank you very much. As you can see, this is made out of towels that they sell right here. And she put it all together for me, and it holds my bugle. I wear it strapped over my side when I play at the military funerals at the National Cemetery. And it just hangs down like this here, and I pull it out. And obviously, you stand at attention, and you play, and then you put it back. But again, when you heard the scale of what that can do, and this is a bugle, and obviously, this is what a bugle looks like. Everything is solid except you have one little sliding valve right here, okay? And one of the things that you try to do with it, obviously everything is with the mouth, but again you have limited notes. And one of the things that you do with the bugle, but again, all bugle calls were naturally made for the bugle. And because they are, obviously, those are only the 6 notes, and they're just played in different variations. But again, you don't have your fingers to help you. So everything has to be done with your lip. So obviously one of the things that you try to do is, just like any other particular muscle you must develop when you practice, you got to also develop a lip. And I'm sure, some in the room, probably all know, Louis Armstrong. If you ever saw him play, I mean, he had his actual mouthpiece was almost like indented as much as he played. And anyway, with the notes that you can play with this, so you take those notes and they just make a combination of them. So for instance, one of the things that I do at the cemetery is a call that you probably have heard, or maybe you haven't. It's when they raise the flag. And if you ever see them raise the flag at a service or wherever they are, they have a flag pole and they take it. And it's done very militarily, and it's in an order where they take it and one arm comes down, others up, comes down, and that's the way they raise the flag. It's very methodical. And one of the things that they do, they usually raise the flag, and it's called Call to the Colors. And obviously the colors being the United States American flag. And one of the things a bugler has to do, which I do at the cemetery and also at different memorial services, is play that. Okay, and normally I play it on my trumpet, but since this is a bugle demonstration, I will play it on the bugle, and it's all done with lips. Okay, so hopefully I'll do it the way it's supposed to be played. I said, you know, you're going into the 4th grade, and would you like to play an instrument? And Grandpa will, you know, be very glad I'll play for lessons and things. And, you know, I said anything, and he said yes. And he wants to play the trumpet, which of course makes me feel terrific. So it's really, really super. And not only that, I was telling Marie also, he just called me last night. He's a Cub Scout at Schuylerville. And I guess I'm his show and tell person. So on April the 11th, he wants me to go to the Cub Scouts, and he says, Grandpa, please wear your uniform and bring your trumpet. And he says, I want you to tell all the kids what you do at the cemetery. And obviously I play taps at the cemetery for veterans, and that's something that's a very passionate thing with me. And I love doing it. And I do it once a week. And sometimes we have as many as 7 burials. And obviously trying to play that extremely well, because the families, it's sort of like the last farewell to your loved one, and it's extremely important. And my wife always tells me, if you cry, you can't play it, so I try not to, and I close my eyes usually every time I play so I can concentrate on what I'm doing and not watching family tears come down their faces. It's pretty tough to do. And I remember just doing it last week and going there, and I remember the wife of the deceased veteran said, who played taps? And they said, he did. And she came up to me and said, do you know you make everyone cry? And I said, well, I do it to myself too. So it's pretty interesting. But anyway, if you don't mind, this is a United States Army regulation. And obviously it's a duplicate, it's not an old one, but it was made, and I obviously wanted one, and I picked one up for myself because there are times when you need to play the bugle. And some old veterans, and most of us from the Second World War, are in their 80s, and they prefer that they have the real thing, so I have the real thing. And anyway, this is obviously taps, which you've heard, and I'll play that for you. situation, to really play. And like I said, closing my eyes helps me a lot because it's a very, very strange ceremony when you end up knowing the fact that people in front of you are crying in tears. And of course, it's their loved one, and that's the one thing that a bugle can do. It's an instrument, it is music, and it also has meaning, and it's the meaning that gets to the people. And we're all going to go through it. That's the interesting thing. It's like, there's no way you escape passing on in life as you get older, and it's always there. And the one thing that we always try to do, particularly as veterans, and most of us all here are that work in this particular museum, and obviously I'm a volunteer at the cemetery, so I do that also. No one gets paid for any of these types of things. You do it because it's what you feel, and it's a tribute. So that's one of the things. Now, for instance, just getting to something in terms of what a general may tell the little bugler, Gustav Sherman, and saying, you want to move forward. And if you want to move forward, that's a command that tells them. And he's on horseback, by the way. And he's on horseback telling all the people that wherever they are out in the field, and they could be, almost like a mile away, they've got to hear this to know it's time to move forward. Obviously, there's got to be a retreat, and that also comes out. And again, he's on horseback. This is halt, meaning the fact that they're on horseback wherever they're going, and obviously the men who are on foot obviously have to halt also. As you can see, each one of them, they can't be very long. You've got to get someone to understand. Now you can imagine, you have a rifle in your hands, everything else. You can imagine you're 10 and 11 years old, and then there's some guy on a bugle this time. What the heck did that just mean? I mean, it's like you really don't know. And that's sort of like why I'm saying, I'm trying to put myself in that position, and I'm looking at it, and I'm saying, if I was out in that field, and as you can see, and I don't even know them all, I'm reading and stuff, and I know what I'm playing, but it's like, what message is coming across when you're way out there and you have that? And it is pretty difficult, but obviously, it's one of the things that they did, because as you can imagine, and the other thing I can give you a little clue on is like anything else, you can imagine, this is the bugle, this is the bugler, I'm there and I have certain calls, and I'm for the Union. Okay, I'm the Union Army, and the Northerners are going to go fight against the Southerners, and they have the Confederate armies, and they're going to have that. Well, just imagine, the Confederates have a bugler too. So just imagine if you really wanted to screw up the Union Army, you have the Southern bugler playing the Northern bugle notes. And you should imagine saying, let's get them to retreat. Now, which bugler are you listening to? So you can imagine, this is the way things are fought, this is the way things are, and this is why communications, you try to have secrecy. So one of the things that you must do is also as a bugler, is it the Northern bugler? Is that Gustav playing? Or is it, Jimmy Jones who is playing for the Southern Confederate Army? So one of the things that you have to do is like anything else like they do in communications, you have a code. Okay, and there's a code for that particular day. Okay, and maybe that particular day says, before you listen to the Southern bugler, you got to know it's the Northern bugler. And here's what the Northern bugler is going to do today. Okay, and it might be an introduction. Okay, and it might be like this. Now, whatever I play next, they say, that's our guy, because you were left with the word. I don't know whether you remember some of the things that were even in the Second World War, or one of the things that they had when they knew that they were going to be parachuting in. They have to have communications. How do you know who's the enemy and how do you know who is not? And you don't really know, because first of all, they're probably going to be speaking English also, even though you're in a country that doesn't speak it. They have people out there that do. And I don't know whether you remember that during the Second World War, they have little clickers, because they're saying, who goes there? And they're supposed to give 2 clicks back. Okay, and all they did is they carried these little, it was like a 2-cent item. But it was one way of communicating, these are my guys. Okay, now of course, as you know, just like I'm saying, the bugler from the south taking whatever the northern calls were and trying to get you to do something different. During that period of time, they did the same thing. They ended up saying, well, what could you end up doing to really louse that up? Well, if you have a military person who has somehow been injured or taken captive, they now know the fact that it's the 2 clicks. And that happens certain times of the time also. They say, well, we know, yeah, we're friendly. And all of a sudden you expose yourself and you got shot. So now you have a military person. And I guess the one thing, and particularly since, again, most teachers appear to be, and have been, I guess, for a long time, women, and the few men that are in that profession we're so grateful that we have it, because, you know, children need role models from a male point of view also. And the more men that we can get in there, the better. So I always think that's really terrific. But one of the things that you really have to understand is the fact that when you end up with communications with various people, you have to end up with the opportunities of letting them know, you know, I guess the importance of being in the military. And one of the things is the fact that, you know, you are fighting for freedom. And obviously freedom is the thing that we all, you know, just love and preserve. And if you've never had it, I mean, if you've never lost it, you know, you really don't know how to really appreciate it. And if we're lucky enough to all be here, this is really something. I've been, I guess I consider myself fortunate to be in areas where people who don't have it, and they tell you what it means to them. And I said, wow, it's absolutely incredible when I see people in my own family who have come over as immigrants and how much they love this country. Not because we're perfect, because obviously we're not, but just the fact of how they appreciate, and they're not rich because they come here with nothing. And you see the stories when you go to Ellis Island, and you see what these people will do for only one thing, that dream of, I'm going to make it here. Because no one is really controlling their freedom. And you're allowed to be there. There's no magic. It's just hard work. And the other thing that really amazes me also is the fact that, and I have quite a few of my own family who came over, and I just love listening to them speak. And it's like one of those things that, you know, they've come and they've made something that from nothing. You know, they can't speak a word of English, and they have like maybe $10 in their pocket, but they've worked hard and they came, and I just think that's absolutely terrific. So I guess my message in terms of not only does it start here, but what freedom may mean for people, and it could mean different things to various others. But I was just telling Marie, who you're going to hear talk also, who is you know, the first Congressional Medal of Honor winner. I was saying, you know, when they ended up having a democracy vote in Iraq, all the men were in hiding because they were afraid they would get shot if they showed up at the booth. And who showed up? You know, 20,000 women. 20,000 women showed up to vote while the men stayed in hiding. Maybe they had more to gain from freedom because they're, you know, they obviously aren't a group. And I just thought, I said, you know, if people would give more attention to what women are doing in this day and age and what they've done all through life, and this is another example. 20,000 women showed up to vote, and all they want is the freedom to be left alone. You know, they don't want anything else. Just, you know, stop crucifying me because I'm a woman. You know, and the other example they had also was having a woman who, being raped, was killed by her family, which just was on TV. You probably saw it, how tragic that is, that her own brother killed her because she was a dishonor to the family, because she was raped. I mean, you know, these are some of the things they were fighting for. So one of the things as a military veteran myself, and I was in the Vietnam War, and again, and although I wasn't a bugler, you know, but they did want me to play in the United States Air Force band, and I sort of didn't want to do that. I sort of wanted a different experience, and I became a cryptographer. And in crypto, if you're not familiar with it, it's just the decoding and encoding of messages. And just like the messages you get with a bugle, these are now messages that have to go to different places. And again, the same thing with codes. And so I'm sort of in still the same line, but it's mainly communications. And I'm sure that's the same thing that you do as teachers. You try to communicate. those communications down to children so they would understand. And that's one of the things that I did in the service, and I did it in the NATO base, which is called the National Alliance for Treaty, NATO Alliance for Treaty Organization, and I worked in NATO in Naples, Italy, and with all the NATO headquarters command, with all the service branches and everyone there, and it's quite an experience when you work with people who come from different countries. You always want to know their perspectives. Anyway, thank you for that. The other thing I wanted to do was show you also being on the trumpet. And obviously, like I said, you can't play certain things on the bugle because there's only like 6 notes and there's a rhythmic pattern to each one of those. But with the trumpet, you can actually do various things. And one of the things that I try to do is, play obviously military type things for some of the deceased people when they ask me to, because of the branch of service they were in, and I could do some of that for you now also.
Bugle or trumpet at 10-minute intervals so that you're able to go to the next location. This runs like a little country fair. You've got a map in the front of your red booklet. You'll find that there's one location in the museum with a red dot on it. These museum locations are for your opportunity to hear the presentations, and all I ask that you do is, as soon as you're able to look at your map, go to the location that you see marked on the map with the red dot, and that's where your first presentation will begin. So we'll see you out on the drill shed floor, and we'll listen in 10-minute intervals for Joe to bugle or trumpet, so we need to move on to the next person. Yes, you can leave your coats there and your purses, everything's safe. The National Guard is here.
Just so that you know, like I said, communication, so that it'll be me playing and not the southern, not the Confederate.
This is G. Actually, I'm over here though.
primary documents and several copies secondary documents. First of all, we have about 2,500 Civil War carte de visites. These are, it's a French term that can be loosely translated as calling cards. They were the first cheaply, inexpensively produced photograph. So a lot of times soldiers, when they were going off to war, they would stop in at a photographer, or the photographer would come to the front, take their picture, mass produce them, and the soldiers would give them out or send them back home. I'll pass this one around. The photographer's imprint is on the back. That one's out of Brooklyn. I don't know if that picture was taken in Brooklyn or someplace else. So we have about 2,500 of them. And I'd like to...
Like,
Pardon?
What would they give them out? Like women they met, or what would they? You said mementos of people they met,
Yeah.
just as.
I'm not sure if it was a romantic thing or a casual thing among men. I know that a lot of them sent them home to their families, but I don't know if you only gave them out to a girlfriend or something. Yeah.
Is that still right at the beginning? Right?
November.
Yeah. Are they? Oh, too bad. This gives you some sample ideas in there of how to interview. You can use it and adapt it to interviewing anybody. When I did 6th grade, I was self-contained, and I used to have in the area, we had someone who was a writer of scripts for, what's it called, Tales from the Crypt, that used to be on television. And I used to have her in, and the kids would interview her in class, and then they'd have to interview someone outside of class. So you can, fit them in anywhere, or you could pretend, have them do a famous person, have one kid pretend they're a famous person, and so on. There are a lot of different ways of doing that. Also, if you're interested in your curriculum, we have tapes available. These are some of the sample tapes of interviews we've done. This is Clarence Dart, who was a Tuskegee airman. He lives in the Saratoga area. He was a fighter pilot in World War II. So we do have we've got over 900 interviews in our program now. Most of them are now. John Brundage was a Marine, Guadalcanal. He lives over here, and Nelson. So he's local also. So we have a lot of contacts with veterans locally that might be willing to come into your classrooms and talk.
So there were two types of flags. They generally were 4 feet square. This is a miniature version to show you. One of the flags was white with a red center. This was used during dawn and dusk or in times of poor visibility. The other flag is the exact opposite. It was red with a white center, and that was used during daylight, bright, visible times. So I do have an alphabet, and you can certainly grab a copy for yourself off the table. Adopt the project. Let's see, code of 1861. Simple motions with the flag to identify a letter. So you can see A is left, left. So basically you would start out with the flag above your head so that people could see that you're ready. And then you just move it to the left, That would be A, and then you just bring it back up to the top. Just begin the next. And the next one is B, which is right, right, left. You go right, right, and then left again. Bring it up to the top, signifies you're ready for the next letter in the sequence. So I do have a couple pictures here that I can show you. If you could just slide around here. This is a Matthew Brady photograph from the Battle of Antietam. And here you can see a white signal flag furled upon his staff slightly with a red center. And they just felled the trees and quickly manufactured this signal station for use on the battlefield. They also had more elaborate signal stations like you see here. Just to give you some perspective, there's a man on a horse right there. So that's got to be 8 feet at least. So this is well over 100 feet, very tall. And you can see lines here that they would have set up for the telegraph. So this was built along the James River in Virginia, and they can see a red signal flag with the white center on the top.
By a German officer at the tail end of the war. He visited at West Point, saw the American artillery train there, and possibly this gun was among them with the date and circumstance of their capture. So, as the war is going on, and it is a long one, it's one of the longest wars in our country's entire history, we desperately were seeking outside assistance. Spain was helping us unofficially early on, the French were helping us unofficially, but it was the battles at Saratoga that brings France in as an ally. And of course, they are focused mostly here on the war in New York State. There's a lot of that, but what folks forget is that the war spills over into an international conflict. Some of the names of cities and towns affected by that terrible tsunami and earthquake last year show up in the Revolutionary War as France and England are fighting naval actions and land actions in that part of the world. So there are people on the far side of the globe, didn't even know we existed, that are affected by the war and the events in New York State. But other than that, it's not very important at all, so don't bother us. But anyhow, I know you folks are all in the grade school level. We at the battlefield, I have to put in a plug for us, at the battlefield we are trying to improve our offerings too. But one of the things that we do have, if you get a chance, all your schools deal with BOCES, right? Okay. In the media center, there is a haversack kit that is borrowable. It's on free for loan, and it's got activities. It has DBQs in it. It has also, we try to put in some extra disciplinary things as well. So if you're more comfortable with, let's say, science or math, we've got a few activities in there as well. Do we have any that are good at math? No math teachers in this bunch?
We're all math.
Well, that's what I mean, which is your specialty. I know that, but you know. Because one of the fun things that I always like is when you find the cannons to figure out the weight. Do you know how to figure out the weight of the cannon?
Why don't you swing around this?
Larry mentioned that this is a 6-pound cannon. 6-pounder is the correct phrase. It fires a cannonball that weighs 6 pounds, but the gun is a lot heavier. And on the back of the gun, you look for 3 numbers. These right here. And you can see it's 4, 3, 17. There are dashes between the 4 and the 3. It's 3 and 17. Okay? That is the weight of the gun. Now, the first number is on the old hundredweight. So the first number, you multiply times 112. So 4 times 112, that's easy, 448. The next number are quarters of the hundredweight. So those are each 28 pounds. So 3 times 20, 28 is 84. And then the last one is pounds. So you got to add 448, 84, and 17. Quick. Took us about a half an hour, but counting on our fingers. Makes the metric system better and better every day. So you can throw things like that in the mix, of course. There's, returns of how much equipment is going to be used in supplies. Math is a very good one for that. So we're supposed to get so much each day in the way of food and things, what it's going to take to make an army. As far as science goes, well, you could look into the metallurgy of how they put together a cannon. There are the Diderot Encyclopedia. There are many volumes, of course, and that shows up a lot in some various works. So if you want to build a cannon in your own backyard, they'll show you how to do that too. But you put it all together, and there's lots of approaches to all this sort of things.
Different angles of teaching.
That's right. Which you guys know all about, of course.
I have a little handout for everybody, and it's a kind of a civics comic book, and it really teaches. We use this to hand out to kids during kids groups coming through here, and it teaches them about their liberties. A little ghost that comes back from the Revolutionary War and tells them a civic story about our country, the 3 branches of the government, and so on. And there's also a March for Parks. It's an upcoming event at the battlefield. So we're mixing and matching here a little bit. Look that over also. So.
How do you know I'm supposed to be there?
No, I'm just saying who I am. I'm H, Station H.
Well, I was an R, but I've done that.
I think so,
As much as I'd like, I'll be
and we decided that there's 2 or 3 of us that are volunteering here or working here that are retired teachers, so we thought we'd put an educational program together. And this is kind of the result of it. What we decided to do is put a program together that shows the common soldier during the Revolutionary War, the Civil War, and World War II. And basically, it's set up so that school groups can come in. Right now, it's set up so that 1 classroom at a time instead of a grade level. Many of us were in schools where you don't go anywhere unless it's
men. They disguised themselves as men and fought. There was an occasion where a woman was so successful at disguising herself as a man that it wasn't until the early 1900s when she was in an accident that they discovered that she indeed was not a man but was a woman. She completely immersed herself in the male role.
Or they're hot. Except when it comes to World War II, all the things
found on examination that she was a woman. About 5,000 women volunteered to be nurses, and this was on both sides. And one of the women who volunteered was Louisa May Alcott, and she wrote a book about her experiences. It's called Hospital Sketches. This I printed off the internet. It's available there, or I believe Glens Falls has the book there. So if that's something you'd like to read, or if you'd want to have your students look online, it's available online. Some women accompanied their husbands during the battle, and this woman, who was a Southern sympathizer, married a Union man and accompanied him to the battlefield, and she wrote a diary which is also online, talking about her experiences, the balls and parties she went to in Washington, and her feelings about life during the Civil War. One of the things that I find really very beautiful is during the Civil War they printed envelopes. The actual envelopes were 3 by 5. I enlarged these just a little bit so that you can see them better. And the New York Historical Society has about 3,000 different envelopes in their collection, all depicting different people, different events, some battlefield scenes, some caricatures, and that information. The last person that was here wanted to know if they'd be getting website information, but there's that. I'm not sure how that's going to be conveyed to you. Women were still expected during that time, even though there were rumblings of the women's rights movement, Susan B. Anthony and others. They were still expected to primarily be at home and care for the home and children. And the women who did stay at home also wanted to do something to support the war effort on both sides, and they formed ladies' aid societies. There were approximately 20,000 ladies' aid societies in the United States during the Civil War, and they did things like promoting concerts, fairs, plays that would raise money to support the soldiers. Here we have one, it's a floral and fruit festival. And women made things, sold them, and then the money was donated to the soldiers. They also knitted mittens and a special kind of socks that had been developed by the Sanitary Commission that helped promote circulation in soldiers' feet so they didn't run into as many problems. In order to divert their attention from the war, there were two magazines that were printed. One was Godey's Ladies Book, and the other one was Peterson's magazine. At the height of the popularity, their circulation was about 175,000 apiece. And these you would equate to something like Good Housekeeping or Better Homes and Gardens, with a little fashion thrown in. I don't know what, maybe Vogue. And here's just some excerpts. They had different recipes for cooking. They had different recipes for cleaning. And one of my favorites is a recipe for how to keep your hair from falling out. But they also talked, women were very interested in what was going on in Europe as far as fashions went, especially Paris. And so they read this voraciously. And here's they had hairstyles. This is how you're supposed to wear your hair during that time period. And they talked about the different materials that were being used and how to accentuate different parts of your clothing. Along with raising money and knitting mittens, one of the prime things that women did when they got together was make lint. And this is lint. In fact, when the war started, the call went out that people were going to need a lot of lint to pack wounds. So this is lint.
So they made this.
They made this. They tore up their linen tablecloths, they tore up their linen sheets.
This would go right on the wound?
Yes, it was either packed in the wound or it was applied to the wound and then bandages put over it. So they tore up their, yes, they tore up their linen and then they had to replace that. So most women still knew how to spin and weave, and so they wove new tablecloths and new sheets and towels. But I thought maybe you all like to try to do this, since this was an occupation for the women and the children and all those men who did not go to war. But what you had to do, there were two ways of making this. You could either scrape it with a knife, which I didn't care to do, or you have to pull out all of the transverse threads. Did you? Oh yes, cut out jeans.
The fraying of the bottom?
Yes.
Yes. Oh my gosh. Do you have costumes where the children could dress up as well as do this?
No, but please write that down.